asked a question again in the Seanchas Mór, what is the preserving shrine? Just to repeat the question, like a Platonic dialogue. And again they say it's easy, it is landscape and what is preserved within it. So the way that we keep the memory, the way that the great Seanchaí, the way the great Druid or the great Filla or the great Olav kept the knowledge that we have built up over these generations alive is by encoding the songs and the stories and the legends in the landscape. And we have such a great example today. As Omar said, all of the stories are rooted in landscape. So we're at this time where, fortunately, where the whole world is going chaotic and global, but we realize that we have these crana fertile, we have these stout ores, rooting us back in tradition, rooting us back into the land. And the real beauty about this time is that it's not only just the stories of Cuchulainn and Fionn McCool and the great warriors that are coming, but it's the stories of the women, the stories of the goddesses. Like in Siobhan Éireann, he said there, my favourite bit was Acha Groinja, or Ach Groinja. Either plain or Ach, the ford of Groinja. So we see, once we see in a place name, if it's Ach Groinja, if it's the ford of Groinja, we know this was a trackway. This was a routeway where people passed long ago. If it's Acha, it was an area where people tended the land, where people farmed. And then Groinja. Groinja is one of the great goddesses, Groinja of the grain, because as I said, we, the Bronze Age people, and those who came before us were farming people. So the grain was our ancestor. Groinja, or the other great goddess, Anya, who is coming out, who is revealing forth in Munster. Again, Anya from An, from the brightness, from the sun, from coming from the south. The warmth, the sun, the brightness, the power source that was in all of us, that's in the soil. And in this moment where we're realizing that the land is a goddess, we're realizing the goddess is what's going to nourish us going forward, we're reconnecting with that land. And so these are some of the ideas that I'm trying to link through in Listen to the Land Speak, which is looking at the rivers, looking at the trees, looking at the mountains, the bogs, and the stories that they want to communicate to us if we just open ourselves to it. So I'm going to read a short section from the piece about rivers. The rivers, actually the rivers as goddesses is how this chapter is, because of course, you know, all the rivers in Ireland have, in Irish, have they are the female declension, except this one, except on Toulon, but that's even debated. So, on a recent journey to northwest County Donegal to gather Irish words about the sea and coastal practices, I met a fisherman and a local authority official, Donegal Bui, who pointed out a bridge to me over the Crowley River and told me that its name was Drihid an Chairan, the Rowan Bridge. I noticed a line of rowan trees growing along the bank, and he said the rowan kept the evil spirits, the wee people, away. The trees protected the community because the river was a dangerous place. Now, I presume that he was referring to the risk of flooding, but he went on to say that his grandmother used to warn him not to get too near the river's edge or to approach a lakeside at night, because the fairies passed along these waters in long, shallow boats in search of human souls to take to their realm. If you get too close, they would grab you and pull you in. The idea of rivers being dangerous has waned in recent years, as many of them have been so comprehensively banked and bridged that their ability to create and destroy, to nourish life and to take it, seems diminished. This was not always the case. Streams and small rivulets were regarded simply as watercourses running through the countryside, but a river of any reasonable girth or length was likely to be more than it seemed. Often they were boundaries between this world and the other world, or else goddesses in their own right. O'Bweel told me that the Crowley River had a dower chul, a giant otter, associated with it, who swam the river at dusk looking for young children to take back to the other world. And it was known that the fairies couldn't have children of their own, and so needed to steal human ones. Now this concept of water spirits taking children is a universal one. Throughout Africa and South America, there are tales of sinister beings who drag unaccompanied children into their watery realms. Greece and Mexico have similar mystical water characters who lurk along the riverbanks, grieving their own children and waiting for human children who wander by. Estonia also has a female water deity who is cunning and can beguile passers-by with her seductive voice that resembles the hypnotic murmur of a river. In Ireland, stories about such things were told around the fire to whoever gathered for a night's bohantiocht, the practice of frequenting neighbours' houses to hear old stories. And so children learn to accept them as part of their reality, questioning them only later, if ever. Such stories played a central role in protecting and guiding the community. Now, the notion that rivers were boundaries and that one can be sucked into them, into other realms through them, certain lent potency. It changes one's view of a river to believe it has autonomy and its own internal desires. If a river did succeed in capturing a soul to offer it to the underworld, you could ask it to show you where to discard the empty body. I remember as a child in West Kerry hearing news on the radio of a young boy who was believed to have drowned in the River Boyne and Slane in County Meath. And an elderly neighbour who was in visiting my grandmother suggested that they should light a candle and place it in a little jar on top of the last sheaf of wheat gathered in the field at harvest time, and then send this floating down the river at night. He swore that it would lead the searchers downriver to wherever the body had been caught up in the banks of the reeds. In fact, just last week, a researcher in RT told me that his first cousin died in 1982, and they did the same. They put a bale of straw on the river down to Waterford, and it brought, with a candle on top of it, and it brought the family to the body. Folklore is full of tales of rivers working in conjunction with good kings and chiefs to help feed people by bringing fertility to the soil and water to the crops. In contrast, a bad king, an unjust, unwise or infertile one, would alienate the river, and the land would suffer as a result. Rivers would often conspire to protect those who showed deference to them, flooding a ford as their enemies approached, for example, or washing away a bridge to stop an army advancing. There are even accounts of them rising up and drowning whole battalions, then sweeping them out to sea. This idea is based on the ancient concept of sacral kingship, in which the king was wedded to the sovereign deity of nature, ruling only with the support of its grace and power. Legends recount stories of kings performing rituals that suggest a carnal relationship between the king and the land. The phallic-shaped stones are found at ritual or coronation sites. And this idea was alluded to regularly in poetry right up until the 18th century, when my great-granduncle, 4 generations back, Aegon O'Rahilly, was still writing. Poets described rivers teeming with fish as a result of the power and fertility of the local chief. We've all actually experienced rivers communicating with us, soothing our frazzled thoughts in those moments when we gravitate instinctively towards them with harried minds, or inspiring a moment of heart expansion as we catch a glimpse of shimmering beauty while driving over a bridge, or invariably sparking floods of warm elation in us when we dare to go in for a quick summer's dip. So what's so lucky about Ireland in a world where everything has changed so much is we still have the knowledge, we still have the legacy of that lore imprinted in the minds of the storytellers and the singers who've kept them, the musicians who've kept the knowledge alive, but also in the manuscripts. So it is just all it requires for us is to turn back to it, to realise the river, to realise the land, to realise so much of what is sacred has this balance between the female and then the humans engaging with it. It's in a time of enormous richness, and it excites me. And so for me to come to Leitrim, which has managed to keep so many of its own songs, so many of its own culture alive, and to launch this book is a great honour. Agus Manchán, go raibh míle maith agaibh. Thank you.